I am not the kind of man who speaks of fate. I rule the Ashenmoor Reach, a kingdom of iron ridges and frostbitten passes, of wolves who patrol the high meadows and courts that sharpen their tongues on anyone who shows weakness. I am Alpha King Rael of Ashenmoor, and I have held this throne since I was 19 years old, through council wars and border challenges and a grief so large it once threatened to swallow the mountain itself. I am not a man given to wonder, but I have to start with the eagle, because without the eagle, nothing else makes sense. His name was Sorn. He had been in my family for 7 generations. Not the same bird, the old records said, but the same spirit. A mountain eagle of uncommon size, black-winged with a crest of pale gold, bound to the Ashenmoor bloodline by a compact so old, no one alive remembered its terms. The compact was simple in effect. Sorn perched, he flew, he returned. He was not tamed, no one had ever been foolish enough to call him tamed, but he chose to be present, and that choosing was its own kind of fidelity. For 40 years, he had chosen no wrist. My father's death had broken something in the bird. That was the only explanation the old falconers gave, and they gave it quietly, as though speaking too loudly might embarrass us both. The eagle ate. He roosted in his tower chamber above the great hall. He flew at dusk and returned before dawn. But the perch arm, that ancient gesture of partnership between the Ashenmoor line and Sorn's kind, he refused it from every hand extended, mine included. I had extended my arm more times than I would admit to any council member. In the first year of my reign, when I was new enough to the crown that I still flinched at unexpected noise. In the 3rd year, after I had settled into my authority and thought perhaps the bird might sense it. In the 8th year, on the anniversary of my father's death, standing alone in the tower at first light, hoping something might happen that I could not explain to anyone. Sorn had looked at me each time with his extraordinary pale eyes, the color of winter sky the moment before snow, and he had not moved. The falconers stopped bringing me to the tower after the 10th year. I think they believed it was cruel to keep watching me fail. I believed it too, if I am being honest, and I stopped going. She arrived on the last day of the autumn market. Mira, though I did not know her name yet, came with the northern traders out of the Velen Pass, contracted as a traveling healer to tend the merchant parties injured and sick during the mountain crossing. She was not remarkable to look at in the way that court women were remarkable. No gilded hair, no careful posture, no gown designed to catch a king's eye. She wore layered wool the color of pine bark, her dark hair braided back from a face that was more thoughtful than beautiful, and she moved through the market crowd with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had learned that the world did not slow down for urgency, so you simply had to be calm enough to outlast the noise. I noticed her because she stopped a bleeding. A cooper's boy had caught his hand on a barrel hoop, a nasty gash, the kind that panics children and frightens parents, and she was at his side before the mother finished crying out, pressing her palm flat against the wound, speaking to the boy in a voice too quiet for me to hear from where I stood on the great hall steps. The boy went still, not faint, still, the way a frightened animal goes still when something in it recognizes safety. Within a minute the bleeding had slowed. Within 3, she had wrapped the hand with cloth from her pack, and the boy was looking at her, with the dazed gratitude of someone who has just been pulled back from a fear they didn't know how to name. She did not look around for approval when she finished. She packed her cloth, spoke briefly to the mother, and moved on to the next stall. My head of household, Wynne, was at my elbow. "She's good," he said. "She's very good," I agreed. "The palace healers have been asking for a consult on the wing rot in the tower aviary. Sorn's been pulling at his secondary feathers for 3 weeks. We've tried salves." I looked at the woman in pine bark wool, who was now examining a child's ear at the request of an anxious father, and I thought about saying no. I was careful about who entered the inner precincts of the palace. I was careful about everything. Carefulness had kept me functional through 40 years of governance and one very large grief, and I was not inclined to abandon it. "Send Wynne to her," I said. "Offer the standard healer's fee for a consultation. Don't mention the eagle by name." Wynne's mouth curved at the corner. "As you say, my lord." She arrived the next morning. I did not go to the tower. I told myself there was no reason to. I had council correspondence, a disputed grazing boundary in the Eastern Reach, 3 letters from the Coldspire pack that required careful diplomatic reading. All of this was true. All of it was also a reason to stay away from a tower where I had failed so many times that my own falconers had stopped offering me the chance. Wynne came to find me at noon. The healer examined the aviary birds, he said. She's treated the feather pulling with a poultice, said it was a nutritional deficiency in the prey supply, something about the winter rodent migration shifting south. She gave very clear instructions to the falconers. They seemed impressed. Good, I said. Pay her and arrange passage south if she needs it before the pass closes. She's still in the tower. I looked up from my correspondence. Sorn wouldn't let her leave, Wynne said, and his voice was carefully neutral in the way of a man who has been my household head for 20 years and has learned when to empty his expression of everything it might otherwise contain. I set down my pen. He flew at her? No. Wynne paused. He landed on her arm. I went to the tower. I am not proud of how quickly I went. I walked, which is to say I did not run through the corridor like a man who has waited 40 years for something, but I walked faster than I usually walk, and the guards on the staircase stepped aside without my needing to gesture. She was still there. She was standing near the broad window that overlooked the northern ridge, and Sorn was on her left arm. Not her gloved arm, she had no glove. The eagle's talons, each one the length of a man's forefinger, were gripping her forearm with the careful, calibrated pressure of a bird who knows exactly how much force it is using, and she was holding her arm steady with the kind of absolute stillness that is not absence of feeling, but the containing of it. Sorn's pale eyes were half closed. He was making a sound I had not heard from him in 40 years, a low, resonant note from deep in his chest. Not quite a call, not quite a hum. My father had called it the settling sound, the sound a bird makes when it has come home. She heard me on the stair and turned her head slowly, careful not to startle the eagle. Up close, her face was tired in the way of someone who has been traveling hard and sleeping lightly for weeks, but her eyes were very alert, dark brown, steady, taking me in, without the performance of reaction that I usually produced in people who realized who I was. "My lord," she said, quietly. "He hasn't done that," I said, "in a very long time." "I know." She glanced at the eagle. "Wynne told me. I was going to leave. I had finished with the aviary birds, but he landed before I reached the stair. I didn't want to move in a way that startled him." "You've been standing here. About 2 hours." A slight curve of her mouth. Not apologetic. I didn't mind. Sorn opened his pale eyes then and looked at me. He looked at me the way he always looked at me. That clear, winter sky gaze. But something in it was different. He looked at me and then back at her, and I had the absurd, inarguable impression that he was making a point. I had not survived 40 years of governance without learning to take a point. "What did you do?" I asked her. She considered the question seriously. "Nothing I could explain," she said. "I sat on the floor near his perch to examine one of the aviary falcons. I wasn't looking at him. I wasn't approaching him. I think," she paused, choosing her words, "I think sometimes creatures recognize something in you that you don't recognize in yourself, and they decide you're worth the risk." I stood there in the tower light, the afternoon slanting gold through the north window, the eagle on this woman's bare arm making his settling sound, the court presumably going about its business 7 floors below, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not hope, exactly, something quieter than hope, a small interior stillness, as though something that had been braced for a very long time had just, without announcement, exhaled. "I'm Rael," I said. She looked at me as though this was not a surprise. It wasn't, presumably, but also as though she was deciding how to respond to the particular way I had said it. Not the king offering his title, but a man offering his name. "Mira," she said, "of the Velen settlements." "The Velen settlements," I repeated. "That's a long way from a mountain eagle." "I travel," she said simply. She stayed through the first snow. This was Wynne's doing, officially. He had arranged comfortable quarters in the East Wing and a consulting fee for continued work with the aviary birds, all of which was legitimate and well-reasoned. But I noticed that Wynne had also, without being asked, placed her quarters close enough to the tower stair that she could reach Sorn easily, and had assigned her a firekeeper who worked the same hours as the night watch, so she would not be cold or dark if she wanted to walk the corridors late. Wynne had served me for 20 years. He had never taken this kind of initiative on behalf of a traveling healer. I did not point this out to him. I was not entirely sure I wanted to examine my own reasons for failing to object. I saw her in the afternoons, when I came to the tower to work at the study desk I had set up there years ago. Ostensibly for the view, actually because the distance from the Great Hall made it harder for council members to find me. She would often already be there, sometimes with the falconers discussing aviary management, sometimes simply sitting with Sorn, who perched on her arm with an ease that still stopped my breath a little every time I saw it. We talked. Not about the kingdom at first, about smaller things. About the Velen Pass in winter and the way the snow came sideways through the cut in the ridge. About the medicinal properties of the highland moss that grew on the north-facing walls of the tower. About what it was like to travel alone for years and what you learned about yourself in the sustained quiet of it. She was not performing interest in me, that was the thing I noticed. Court people performed interest. They asked questions with their eyes already calculating the angle of the answer, already preparing their response before you finished speaking. Mira listened the way she had held her arm for the eagle, completely, without agenda, without the flinch of self-consciousness that usually meant a person was thinking about themselves while pretending to think about you. I found myself saying things I had not said to anyone. About my father. About the 40 years of Sorn refusing the arm. About the particular loneliness of being a king, which was not the loneliness of being without company. I was never without company. But the loneliness of being without anyone who was present with you, simply because they chose to be, rather than because presence was required of them. She listened. She did not tell me it would be all right. She did not reframe my losses into lessons. She simply received what I said, and when she spoke, it was from something she had actually thought, rather than from the archive of things people say to be kind. "Grief doesn't end," she said once, on an afternoon of early snowfall, both of us watching Sorn move from perch to window ledge and back. "It changes shape, it gets lighter, maybe. Not gone. Lighter. Like you're still carrying it, but your arms have gotten stronger." I thought about that for a long time after. The court noticed, of course. The court notices everything. That is what courts are for. The perpetual observation of the powerful. The cataloging of deviation. The quiet industry of drawing conclusions from what you see. My council members began arriving at the tower study on pretexts. Lord Carvin of the Eastern Reach needed my signature on a grazing document. Elder Sella of the Moonrights Council had a question about the winter ceremony schedule. Councillor Drust, who had been suggesting I remarry for 11 years with the patient persistence of a man who has learned to work in geological time, arrived with a trade proposal that could have been sent by messenger. They all looked at Mira. They were careful about it. They looked at her the way council members look at things they are assessing, quickly, with eyes that registered more than the body showed. They looked at Sorn on her arm, and at the way I sat at my desk when she was in the room, and at the fact that she did not look at them the way a traveling healer from the Velen settlements ought to look at a roomful of the most powerful people in the Ashenmoor Reach. She looked at them the way she looked at everything, steadily, with neither deference nor aggression, with the quiet self-possession of someone who had decided a long time ago what they were worth, and had not reopened the question since. After the third such visit, Wynne found me on the tower stair and said, very carefully, "There is some discussion." "I know," I said. "The council will raise it formally if you give them the opening." "I know," I said again. Wynne waited. He was very good at waiting. "She's a traveling healer from the Velen settlements," I said. "She has no title, no pack affiliation, no court history. She arrived with a merchant party and she's been here for 6 weeks, because my eagle wouldn't let her leave." "That is all technically accurate," Wynne said. "And?" He looked at me with the expression of a man who has known me for 20 years and has learned that sometimes the most useful thing he can do is not answer the question that was asked. I walked back up to the tower. I found her at the window. Not with Sorn. The eagle was on his high perch, drowsing in the late afternoon warmth from the fire. She was looking north, toward the Velen Pass, and I recognized the look because I had seen it before. The look of someone calculating something. Distance, maybe, weather, the length of time before a mountain road becomes impassable. "The pass closes in 2 weeks," I said. She turned. "I know. After that, the Velen settlements are cut off until spring." I've wintered in worse places than the Velen, she said. It was not a deflection. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. You're thinking of leaving before it closes. She was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. Sorn made his settling sound from the high perch, not directed at either of us, just present in the room. I don't. She stopped. Started again. I'm not a court person. I don't know how to be a court person. I know how to move through the world in a certain way, and that way works for me, and I'm not sure it fits here. What way is that? Useful, she said. Quiet. Not staying anywhere so long that anyone starts to depend on something I might not be able to give. I thought about that. I thought about the healer's instinct in it, the bone-deep understanding that attachment has weight, that when you work with suffering people you have to manage the distance carefully or you will be swallowed by their need. I thought about what it might do to a person, over years of travel, to manage that distance, until managing distance became the default for everything. Sorn doesn't depend on you, I said. He chose you. Those are different things. She looked at me. What is chosen freely, I said, can be freely continued, or freely ended, but it isn't dependence. It's... I stopped, aware that I was talking about the eagle, and not talking about the eagle in roughly equal measure, and that she knew it, and that the tower room was very quiet. Rael, she said, my name, not my title, the way I had offered it the first day. I know what I am, I said. I am a man who rules a cold mountain kingdom and has been alone in it for a long time. I know that's not a simple thing to step into. I'm not asking you to step into it. I paused. I'm asking you to consider that the pass doesn't close for 2 weeks, and there's a tower room with a fire and an eagle who has opinions, and I would like very much to keep talking to you for those 2 weeks, and to see what we think of each other at the end of them. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Sorn, who had opened one pale eye. He's doing it again, she said. He does that. He has opinions. I've noticed. The curve of her mouth again, the one that was not quite a smile, but was warmer than any smile I had seen from her. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, I agreed. I should tell you about the court session. It was the 12th day of those 2 weeks, and I had called a formal council because the grazing dispute in the Eastern Reach had escalated and required a ruling, and several of the Moonrights matters needed decisions before the winter ceremony. It was routine governance, the kind of session I ran a dozen times each turning season. Mira was not supposed to be there. She had come to return a document to Wynne, something to do with the aviary supply records, and she had arrived at the wrong corridor entrance and found herself in the back of the Great Hall as the council was seating itself, and, this is the part I want to tell you carefully, she had moved to leave quietly, the way she always moved, without creating a scene. Sorn, who was perched on the hall stand near the eastern window where he sometimes sat during formal sessions, watched her move toward the exit. And then he flew to her. Not a short flight. The Great Hall is long, 50 feet of stone floor and high-beamed ceiling, and Sorn crossed it in 4 wing beats, the sound of his wings cutting through the noise of the council settling itself, and he landed on Mira's arm, her right arm, this time, the arm she hadn't raised, hadn't prepared, hadn't gloved. She stopped. The council stopped. I stopped, though I was already still. The Great Hall went the particular kind of quiet that comes not from silence but from 40 people simultaneously deciding not to make a sound. Lord Carvin of the Eastern Reach had his mouth open. Elder Sella of the Moonrights Council had put down her ceremonial pen. Councillor Drust, who had been mid-sentence about trade terms, simply stopped speaking as though someone had lifted the needle from a record. Sorn sat on Mira's arm and looked out at the court. He looked out at them the way the eagle had always looked at everything, with the clear, winter sky gaze of a creature that has no interest in performing for observation, that simply is what it is and exists where it chooses to exist. And he had chosen, before all of them. In 40 years, the eagle had refused every arm. In 40 years, the symbol of the Ashenmore bloodline compact had perched on no wrist, not my father's in his last years, not mine in the first desperate tries of my reign, not any falconers, or council members, or visiting dignitaries. And now he was on the wrist of a traveling healer from the Velen settlements who had arrived with a merchant party and had no title and no pack affiliation and no court history. The compact, the old records said, had always known. Mira looked at me across the length of the hall. She looked the way she looked at everything, steadily, with that quality of absolute presence. But there was something else in her face now, something I had not seen before. Not fear, not performance, something open. I rose from the throne. It is a simple thing, rising from a throne. People read things into it, the way they read things into everything a king does. But sometimes a man rises because there is somewhere he needs to be. I crossed the hall. The council watched, not with the calculating assessor's gaze of people mapping angles, with the stillness of people watching something they did not expect to see. I stopped in front of her. Sorn regarded me from her arm with his pale eyes. He did not move. "He's still being opinionated," I said. Her mouth curved. "The real one, not the careful one." "He is. The pass closes in 2 days," I said. "I know. I would like to ask you." I paused, aware of the hall behind me, the council, the 40 years of empty tower and empty arm, and the particular grief of failing something you could not explain or fix. Aware of a woman who traveled alone and managed distance carefully and had decided what she was worth and had not reopened the question. "I would like to ask you," I said again, more quietly, "to consider that an eagle who has not perched in 40 years has strong opinions, and that those opinions may be worth listening to, and that I have strong opinions of my own, and that there are warmer places to winter than the Velen settlements." She looked at me. She looked at Sorn. She looked at the court, which was very still. "That is a great deal of opinion," she said. "It is," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment. The fire at the far end of the hall made its sounds. Sorn's talons shifted on her arm, settling, and he made the low, resonant note from deep in his chest. The settling sound. "I don't know how to be a court person," she said, not quietly, clearly enough that the council could hear. I should say that plainly. "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to be one." "What are you asking?" "To stay," I said. "To choose to stay, not because anyone requires it or because you owe anything to a mountain eagle with strong preferences, because you want to, and to see where that leads." She considered me the way she had considered the eagle on the first day, with her whole attention, without performance, without hurry. "The Velen settlements," she said at last, "are very cold in winter." "Ashenmoor is also cold," I said, "but there is a fire in the tower room." "And an eagle with opinions." "And an eagle with opinions," I agreed. She looked at the court once more. 40 people very still, the eagle making his sound. The king standing in front of her in the middle of the great hall, like a man who had not planned this and did not care. "All right," she said. It was not a grand declaration. It was not a ceremony. It was a woman who traveled alone and managed distance carefully, saying 2 words in a quiet voice, in a cold hall, with an eagle on her arm. The court, slowly, one by one, without anyone calling for it, bowed. Not to the king, to her. To the settling of something that had been unresolved for 40 years. Sorn closed his pale eyes. The settling sound filled the hall. That was 3 winters ago. She still does not think of herself as a court person, and she is right. She is not. She moves through the palace the way she moved through the market on the day I first saw her, unhurried, completely present, stopping where something needs her. The council has learned that she will tell them plainly when they are wrong and will not soften it more than once. Wynn adores her. The falconers consider her the foremost avian healer in the Reach. The pups who live in the pack settlement below the palace follow her on her morning walk with the dedication of small creatures who have recognized something. Sorne perches on her arm every morning. He perches on mine too now. Has done since the day of the Great Hall. I do not know what changed. I do not know the terms of a compact 7 generations old. But something recognized something, and then something else recognized something, and it turns out that a mountain eagle with 40 years of opinions knows things about belonging that the rest of us take much longer to learn. I am not the kind of man who speaks of fate. But I have to admit, standing in the tower at first light, watching Sorn lift from her arm and circle once above the northern ridge before returning, that there are things which choose you long before you understand what you are being chosen for. The eagle knew first. He usually does.